Greetings, Alcoholics. It's time to pull up an easy chair, grab a beer, and get ready for today's new video. Hopefully you'll recall that we just finished a 5-part series in which we built this amplifier as found on the prewaramps.org site on the internet. I was impressed by the fact that depending on which jack you plug into, you will either have a triode or pentode preamp tube. And about a week after the series began, by astounding coincidence, this gem showed up on eBay for sale. I had no choice but to make the owner an offer and ended up buying it for us to dissect. Although it appears to be absolutely identical to the amp on the pre-war amp site, I could tell by the photos and the eBay ad that the circuit must be different. The tube complement was not the same. I think you'll find that the circuit, although different, is every bit as interesting in its own way. So let's begin the dissection. We'll take it out to the workshop, open it up, and see what makes it tick. Well, let's take a close look here at mystery amp number 3. As you can see, the cabinet design and finish are exactly like the one on the pre-war amp site. There's a perfectly flat metal screen here to protect the electrodynamic speaker, and a super nice mustache handle on top. The cabinet sides are excellent, and all 4 of the little corner protectors are in place on the bottom. Turn it around, take a look inside. The cabinet is absolutely solid. All the glue joints are still intact. Normally these things break and rack back and forth, but not in this. Here we have a Jensen electrodynamic speaker, a C10R speaker, and a rather rusty chassis, but with the original tube sockets all clearly marked. The power transformer, let's hope it's in good shape, a little rusty on top. Okay, the rear kind of a bar or brace here is still intact with the original screws. And from the rear, I have to say that the speaker cone looks great. We'll have to test the field coil to see what kind of shape it's in. Unfortunately, that really neat red and silver Jensen decal here or sticker is long gone from the tail of the magnet, but I'm going to come up with a way, I think, to reproduce these. We'll see how that works. The control panel looks just like the one on the pre-war amp site. 3 input jacks, in this case a chicken head volume control, the screw-in mica type of fuse. You can see the grommet at the bottom right where the power cord used to exit, and then the on-off toggle just above that. The cloth is a little bit loose here. It's separated from the bottom of the amp, probably due to moisture. We can see that 2 of the, I believe, 3 original screws are in place that hold the chassis to the cabinet. One other thing that seems to be missing is those little kind of marquees that go above the input jacks that say like instrument and microphone. But on the plus side, this is a really nice little toggle switch with a brass plate that goes behind the switch with the on-off. I don't think I've ever seen one with a brass plate like this. When we look up here, the output transformer is attached to the basket, as is typical on most of these older speakers. All in all, I think the condition is just spectacularly nice, considering that this probably comes from the 1930s. So next we have to take it apart and take a look inside the chassis, start analyzing the speaker, field coil, and other things, and hope to God that our batting average remains really high on this mystery amp. Let's take a look at the tube set that came with the amp. Tubes are nice and clean. 6 C5, 2 6 B5s, and a 80 rectifier, one of the 4-pin early rectifiers, directly heated. The 6 and 7 was missing, but I happen to have one here, so I will add it in when it's time to test the circuit. Okay, I removed the screws and slid the chassis out the back. It's kind of cute. Somebody marked the tubes. They put a little silver spot here on the 80 rectifier right between the two large prongs, and then they put a little silver spot here between the large prong holes. There's only one way it can go in. It's polarized, and so that really isn't necessary, but I get a kick out of seeing little things like this that people do to, I guess, keep themselves from making mistakes. Okay, I removed the 4 nuts and pulled out the speaker. Now, I'm seeing this for the first time just like you are. Okay, this is the first time I've taken this apart. The cone looks excellent. It has plenty of suspension. It's fairly solid. It's missing that dust cover here to keep the dirt and dust out from between the voice coil and the pull piece. So that will have to be fabricated. We've got this umbilical cord here that connects the speaker to the amp, and this is one of the major nuisances with field coil speakers, unless they will unplug. Sometimes they'll put in a plug and you could just unplug it, but if they don't have that, you've got to actually go into the amp if you want to separate these and unsolder all of these wires, and then you can work on this individually. Otherwise, you've got to wrestle both of them at one time. Okay, here's the underside of the chassis, and it's absolutely wonderful, in my opinion. Somebody has gone in and put in some new F&T filter capacitors, which are good quality. Looks like they did a nice job. On the downside, they also installed a brand new power cord here with the chassis ground, and then cut it. That tells me that at some time or other something went wrong in here and they didn't want it to be plugged in again, which makes me a little nervous. We'll have to figure out why that was done. Meanwhile, though, you see all the shielding on the signal wires. This is really quite a gem, I think, internally. Well, I'm going to have to trace the circuit. You'll see under the chassis there's 2 more transformers. We've got the output transformer here on the speaker basket. So my guess is this is going to be a filter choke, and this is going to be one of those interstage phase inversion transformers. Just a wild guess, but we'll see. Once I trace the circuit and figure out what's what, we'll know what these jewels are for. Okay, I installed a new power cord and then plugged into a current limiter, put in the tubes and fired it up. And it came up really nice. All the voltages were correct, but it wouldn't amplify. I traced the problem here to the primary winding of the interstage transformer. Bear in mind, this serves the purpose of a phase inverter. And the primary winding has an open spot somewhere in it. I dissected into it to see if I could find it, if it was superficial, but it was not. I therefore have 2 alternatives. I can buy a replacement from Mercury Magnetics for the paltry sum of $91 plus shipping for this little transformer, or I can come up with some other way to rectify the situation. You can place your bets right now, but I think it's going to be the second alternative. Let's take a look at how the circuits of the 2 different mystery amps compare. First off, to refresh our memories, let's review the mystery amp that we built during the 5-part series. Remember, it has a 6J7 pentode input and a 6C5 triode input. The 6N7 is the phase inverter. The output tubes are 6V6s. There is no interstage transformer here. And now we'll see that even though the cabinet of the eBay mystery amp is identical to the mystery amp that we built, the circuit is completely different. First off, the 6N7 in this case is not the phase inverter like it was in mystery amp number 2. It is the preamp tube. It is a duo triode. When you input at the microphone jack, we go through a volume control and come into this triode grid. When you input on the instrument side, either of these 2 jacks, you come straight in to the grid of this triode. There is no volume control here. You have to use the volume control on your instrument to vary the volume. So difference number one, this is simply a triode input, not a pentode triode input. Now we see that the plates where the signal is going to come out are linked, and they come here through a coupling capacitor to the grid of a 6C5. Now this is simply a triode amplification tube that is going to boost the signal so that it can drive this interstage transformer. Because the secondary of the interstage transformer is center tapped, it will create two out-of-phase outputs and feed them to the grids of the 6B5 output tubes. So difference number two, a big difference is this uses an interstage transformer for phase inversion, whereas the other mystery amp used a 6N7 tube for phase inversion. The end result is the same, however, as we just said. We have out-of-phase signals being sent to the grid of each of the two output tubes. Now the 6B5s are the weirdest tubes you will ever see. Here we have Jack out sunning himself on the back porch, waiting for his favorite green pipe cleaner so that he can play with it. Anything rather than work, eh, Jackie? Just like a teenage boy. What a good pussycat. Now the 6B5s are, in my opinion, about the strangest vacuum tube I've ever seen. And they're a big reason why I dearly love these really old primitive amps, because the manufacturers are going through rapid evolutionary phases, trying to come up with the ideal amplifier, probably at the lowest price. And during that evolution, they came up with this idea called a direct coupled duo triode. Okay, just like a 12AX7, there's two triodes in each tube, but they directly coupled the first triode to the second. They linked the cathode of the first triode to the grid of the second. Down here, they did exactly the same thing. It's just upside down. Now, exactly how this works is rather complex, and I do not want to let it distract us from the idea of the signal flow through this amp circuit and the difference between it and the first mystery amp. But I will go through this very briefly. Imagine you send your signal in here to the grid, and this triode acts like any other triode. The electrons flow from the cathode to the plate, moderated by the signal on the grid. We know that the signal is greatly amplified by this process. Now imagine if you took the signal on the cathode, which is quite large, and sent it over here to this grid. Do you see then that there's internal amplification that takes place? It's almost like a built-in extra stage of amplification that takes place within the tube. So from one tube, it's like you get double output. That's simplified, and that's the way I want to leave it because it's not the issue here really. Now we see that the output from the plate of the second, each of the second triodes goes to a regular output transformer, and then from the secondary of that output transformer onto the speaker. Okay, let's take a look at what the power supply looks like in a circuit that utilizes a field coil speaker. In this case, the rectifier puts out the rectified high voltage, or the B+, and immediately we have a filter cap down here to help smooth it, and we send it over here to the center tap of the output transformer where it feeds the plates of the output tubes. That's exactly like just about every double-ended amp you've ever seen. Next, the B+ will encounter the speaker field coil. This will give us actually two benefits. Number one, as the current flows through this electromagnet coil, it will produce a very strong magnetic field to drive our voice coil back and forth in our speaker. Secondly, because it is a coil, it has reactance to ripple and will tend to smooth out the B+. The coil has some DC resistance also, so it will reduce the B plus from say 325 down to around 300 volts DC, and this is smoother than this. We have a filter capacitor here to assist in the smoothing. We'll send this to the alternate plates of our 6B5 tubes. This is only because we have these weird tubes. Normally, this would go to the screens of the output tubes. Then our B plus encounters a honest-to-God filter choke, not a speaker field coil masquerading as a filter choke. Okay, so as it goes through here, same thing. Reactance smooths the ripple, filter capacitors smooth it, a DC resistance brings it down from say around 300 volts down to around 250 volts DC. We will send it, and this is very smooth, over here to the primary of our interstage transformer. Then finally, for the plates on our 6N7 input tube, we'll just run that B plus, it's already smooth enough, run it through a resistor to bring it down to say around 150 volts, and we send it over here to these plates. The bottom line is there are no fixed resistors in the power supply until we get here past the first, second, third node. That's the first resistor. You're used to seeing resistors in every position, but with this type of power supply, we instead have a speaker field coil in the first position, filter choke in the second, and then finally we use a fixed resistor. Well, thanks to lightning fast delivery by Antique Electronic Supply, I already have the replacement interstage transformer. I did some research on the internet, and they said that this particular transformer from Antique Electronic Supply for $16 and change was an ideal replacement in the old EH150 Gibson amps. I took a chance on it. It is smaller than the original, which makes you nervous. You start to wonder about the current flow capability, but I installed it and it works like a charm. Okay, we see here the microphone input, and we also see that it's the only one connected to a volume control. The other two, I'm assuming instrument inputs, go directly to one of the triodes in a 6N7. The microphone, after going through the volume control, goes to the other triode. Okay, I've got a guitar plugged into the microphone input. That's the only one that has a volume control. I've got the volume control at about half range. Let's see how this sounds. Well, it's about clear as a bell and has excellent bass response. I'm totally impressed and hope you are too. And after about 15 minutes of playing, that little interstage transformer is just cool. Oh, nah, I'm just playing with you. Just cool as can be, okay, to the touch. If it were flowing too much current or if it couldn't handle it, I would think it'd be getting warm by now. Okay, I plugged into one of the instrument inputs. Now it has no volume control. It just runs straight through these resistors right into the preamp tube. So let's see how it sounds. Not too shabby. Well, here's the speaker and chassis back in the cabinet. As you can see, I touched up the rust on the surface of the chassis and the speaker. I'm in the process of still finding a way to duplicate the Jensen speaker. I've got the 6N7 tube in place and the new interstage transformer. And as you heard, it seems to work. Let's see how it sounds now with the speaker in the cabinet the way it came from the factory. I used a product called Lexol on the leather handle, which softened it and made it, I think, a lot nicer and less likely to crack, and installed that back brace. And now it's ready to turn this beast around and fire it up, although not literally, I hope. Okay, here we are with it all buttoned up, guitar plugged in, and volume on the microphone input at about 50%. Seems to me like near perfect tone and volume. Let's see how Bo likes it. Next in our cavalcade of old pickup trucks is this 1941 Model K1 International half-ton pickup. This poor old beast sat out in a field in Deming, New Mexico for God knows how long, with the windows broken out and being used as a trash receptacle. But due to the extremely heavy gauge steel that this thing is made of, it's like about 12 gauge, it's like a battleship. It survived with the body virtually perfect and no trace of rust anywhere. I think this simply reinforces the image of international trucks as being made for farmers and business use and utterly bulletproof. And I'll tell you from my observations, they're right about that. That crank you see inside the windshield, when you turn it, the windshield comes out to provide you with air conditioning in the summer. I just love the lines on this truck. It reminds me sort of a 40 Ford or one of those old 1940 Willis gassers that you'd see sometimes at the drag strip. All of the seams have been filled and molded, so the body just flows together. The hood, although it's two-piece, appears to be one piece. It's got a really neat windshield. It reminds me of some sort of military vehicle. It just had a steel grill, so I wrapped aluminum strips around the grill to make it shiny and kind of spruce up the front end a little bit. Just simple headlights. These are from trailers to be used as turn signals, and they work fine. It's got what are called gasser wheels on it, which I think is appropriate because of the appearance that it has. Took a quick walk around here. You'll see the tailgate's plain. You'll see my famous boat. Some idiot on a motorcycle. You'll see my famous boat taillights and the old shotgun exhaust. You'll be hearing more from them in just a few minutes. The bed is solid steel. This is original. None of those silly panty waist wood beds for international. This one has a differential and front suspension from a Plymouth Volare. The front end has torsion bars, and you can adjust the front end up and down simply with a socket wrench. The gears, it's hard to tell. They're probably around 323s or something like that. The thing I really like about it, though, is the stance. The rake, where it's lower in the front, higher in the rear, and just the overall just meanness of the look of it. It looks sinister to me with the flat black, the giant tires, and big bulbous fenders. To be honest, this may be one of my favorite of all the trucks I've ever owned. The engine is the ubiquitous 350 Chevrolet, in this case a fairly modern version of it, as you can see, because the valve covers have the bolts in the center, not around the perimeter. Aluminum intake, Edelbrock 4-barrel, an air cleaner. Probably the original radiator, which still works perfectly. It has an electric fan up here in front to help it. And all in all, this thing can really get down the road. The transmission is a TH350 Chevy, and the shifter I handmade like I did for the Model A, except this one is vertical. It features a Burns-O-Matic handle with a push button to lock out reverse and park, and also some little spaceship fins that go down into those notches and help you pick each one of your gears. So once you're in gear, those notches keep you there. It cannot change gears until you push the button, lift the little fins, and then you can go into reverse or whatever gear you want. The dash had to be completely renovated with all new gauges. Also, I put in the 4 toggle switches in this panel. The panel itself is removable with 2 screws and contains the bulk of the wiring for the dash, as well as the fuse box. It's got the old racing style hot rod steering wheel, seat belts, which you do need, as you'll see in a few minutes, and diamond tufted upholstery stolen from the coffin of Pancho Villa, or at least that's what they told me. Okay, the transmission's safely in park. Let's start it up, see how it sounds. Always starts up easy. It's got kind of a low loping idle. Let's go listen to it. Ah, the lovely tones. A shotgun exhaust, good Lord's diameter and fairly straight through. Okay, looks like everything's operating well. Let's go take it for a ride out in the country. Okay, let's step lightly on the gas pedal and see what happens. Well, that was invigorating. Now, as you can see, the interior is not particularly luxurious. When I bought it, it was full of trash up to about the dash level. But for such an old, kind of sinister looking beast, this thing has power brakes with disc brakes in the front, power steering, tilt wheel, all the amenities, okay, in a sort of a unsuspecting package. Well, that's about it for our tour of the 1941 International pickup. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you can see in it what I see. It's sort of like the ugly child you have is really a genius underneath. So a lot of people would say this isn't a pretty truck, and I would disagree. I think it's wonderful. I just love this one to death. Okay, so thanks for joining me, and we'll see you again in future videos. Meanwhile, goodbye.